actual politics and journalism and ownership of media. Can you comment a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, what's interesting, specifically in this case, is that you have a focus with Robert Maxwell specifically on science publishing. And after Maxwell's death, you also have Epstein get very involved with the science publisher, John Brockman, who creates the Edge Foundation, which ended up essentially becoming bankrolled almost exclusively by Epstein and was a way to recruit major big name scientific authors from universities like Harvard being the big one, where Epstein also cultivated times through former Secretary of Treasury under Clinton and later president of Harvard, Larry Summers. Maxwell started off a lot of his publishing focus in scientific journals, medical journals, things like that, in the post-World War II era, and really came to be a big force in science publishing and really shaped how that system works today, with a profound implication on access, like public access to scientific journals, and how the money flows of scientific journals, which has had a considerable influence on how that is used and read and accessed by people. And so it's interesting to see Epstein have that focus subsequently. And he also bought some media outlets, including Radar, I think was one of his. And he went in on that with Harvey Weinstein, who, of course, is known as of late for his sexual abusive behavior. But he wasn't so much focused on magazines and stuff. He did get involved with that to an extent. But Robert Maxwell became more focused on that later on. But it's interesting to see the focus on science. And then at the same time, you have some of the other children of Robert Maxwell become pretty focused on science, tech-related endeavors first through companies, but also through associations with the World Economic Forum. In the case of Isabel Maxwell, focusing mainly on tech.
After all that you have done and all this homophobia that you have sowed.
I'm so sorry. Well, certainly it was never my intention. I do believe words matter. I believe we have to show
They do matter. And this right here is the result of a massacre stoked by people like you and the words that you put out into the world. And I want you to know that, and I want you to feel that deep inside. 49 people died because of the rhetoric that you put out there.
I'm so sorry.
I don't think...
What does "I'm sorry you feel that way" mean? What does that mean?
And she did like 2 on-screen appearances throughout the entire 2016 election.
Didn't they do it with a Bush kid too?
The Bush kid did way more actual work than Chelsea did, I think.
Why do these networks say hire every failed daughter? I kind of get hiring the Bush daughter because presumably that gets you access of some kind, but Abby Huntsman.
Huntsman's a weird one.
We got to know what's, we got to have access to John Huntsman.
We're losing the John Huntsman primary. Thing is though, I was never one of the people who hated Chelsea Clinton until the Ilhan Omar thing, really. I was just she's just a completely fucking dull. She's the woman version of Luke Wilson in Idiocracy, basically. That's what I thought, until all this. It was just it's fine. I was like, she's so much better than Meghan McCain, and it's no, they're just both equally fucking shit, but Meghan's a more openly malicious and
sanctimonious and toddlerish.
Well, Meghan's more of a caricature that you can relate to. You can see that person, screaming at a returns department at a department store.
About her dad.
Chelsea's more ambiguously bad,
Yeah, the Jews are so lucky to just have both of them with the combined power to write a single entire children's book without a ghostwriter.
Oh, that was one of the things on Chelsea's resume. Oh, she wrote 2 children's books.
Wow.
It is funny that the victim of anti-Semitism last week was Meghan McCain, and the victim of Islamophobia this week is Chelsea Clinton.
Yeah, I mean, God works in unexpected and mysterious ways.
But today we have a really special guest. We said we were doing an episode specifically about Palestine, about Israel's actions, Israel's war crimes they've been committing, but also the background of Sheikh Jarrah, of these settlements. And today with us, we have a great guest. We have Mohammed Al-Safin from AJ Plus here to talk with us about Palestinian resistance and the future of Zionism and the Palestinian cause.
Thanks, Felix. Pleasure to be on. Thanks for having me.
No, thank you. Thank you for coming on. I'm ready to just jump right into it.
Sure.
So let's start with some background on the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood specifically. Can you give a summary of this specific neighborhood's significance in Israeli expansionism?
Yeah. So to start off, let's talk about what Sheikh Jarrah is and where it is. It's a Palestinian neighborhood. It's quite small in occupied East Jerusalem. That's Israeli occupied East Jerusalem. And one of the things that Israel has been doing ever since it occupied East Jerusalem is it has a kind of target ratio for demographics. It wants to maintain the number of Palestinians in Jerusalem at 40% to 60% Israeli Jews. And this isn't a secret. This isn't some kind of, hidden reporting or investigative journalism that had to reveal this. This is clearly stated in the plans for the municipality of Jerusalem. It's part of Israeli government plans. And the idea is always to maintain a stable Jewish dominance in terms of demographics in the city. And to that end, what Israel has been doing since 1967 when it occupied East Jerusalem and then in the 80s when it formally annexed it is building Israeli settlements in and around the Palestinian neighborhoods and villages that make up East Jerusalem. And it's set its eyes on Sheikh Jarrah because strategically it's important. If it takes Sheikh Jarrah, then it becomes ever closer to completely encircling the main Palestinian neighborhoods around the old city of East Jerusalem. And so since the 80s, what it's done is it has allowed settler organizations, including settler organizations that are registered in the United States as nonprofit organizations, to take the people who live in Sheikh Jarrah, the Palestinian residents, to court, to Israeli court, and claim that the land they live on is actually Jewish property, and therefore these settler organizations have a right to live there. And that's kind of the crux of what's happening. The families that have lived there since the early 50s, and they've been resisting this forced expulsion. Sheikh Jarrah has kind of made it into the news a lot over the last month because the Israeli courts announced that in early May, it was gonna remove 2 families and then several more later in the year. And these families put up, pretty heroic resistance, considering that they have no weapons, they have no protection from the courts, from the Israeli state, and the Israeli state is actually colluding hand in glove with these settler organizations to remove them from their homes. The resistance kind of, sparked a lot of solidarity amongst Palestinians in Jerusalem, in the West Bank, in Gaza in 1948. What we call the Palestinian citizens of Israel, the Palestinians who stayed behind in Israel proper when it was founded. And we can get into that history a little bit as well, because I think it's very constructive. The resistance led to a brutal police crackdown. And what was interesting, and what was kind of dumb on the Israeli police's part, is this crackdown was filmed. It was filmed every day on live coverage from the residents. They would be, streaming on Instagram Live to hundreds of thousands of people in the Arab world, in the diaspora, in the US, all over the world. Media outlets were starting to cover it. And every day, the Israeli police would come in, would crack down on the solidarity protesters who would show up, especially during Ramadan, when a lot of Jerusalemites would go to Sheikh Jarrah and break their fast, kind of in a communal way, outside these threatened homes. And then the settlers and the soldiers would attack them day after day on camera.
I feel like a large part of the picture here that gets overlooked by people who just take that, I don't like massacres line, is not looking at the power relationship here. So Could you talk a little bit on the economic relationship? Well, I guess relationship may be the wrong word, but the role that economic exploitation on Israel's part plays with their relationship with Gaza, because there is, a lot. Israel benefits a lot from Palestinians, both on guest worker permits and undocumented Palestinian labor, where they can pay them even less.
If we're talking about in general how Israel exploits Palestinians, something that always would infuriate me was a lot of the Palestinians who work like among Israelis or like in Israeli companies and these things, they have to pay the fees to be in the union, but they don't get the same protection from the union. I could look that up too. So it's like you have to pay these union fees, and then the union doesn't even defend you the way it defends Jewish Israelis. So that's part of it. I know you were asking in general about like if Israel like needs Palestinians in order to like prop this up. I think there is the weird thing also. It's not even just like the exploitation of the workers. It's that the more you sort of look at the reality here, I think they need like a population to buy their goods, their produce, and how they push it in the West Bank. And it's like frustrating when you go to these like different grocery stores and they have all these Israeli products, and they'll work to make sure that they're cheaper than say like the Palestinian products or the Arab products. So you have these people who are like, okay, well I can't afford to not get these products, and then it just helps boost their economy. And that's definitely true in Gaza too. And in Gaza, like it's not just in the West Bank. In Gaza, I don't know if you saw recently, I forgot which Israeli government official said this. Probably like that fucking idea of Twitter account. But it was like, oh look, we opened the humanitarian crossing, and these are the goods we're letting in. And it's like they shove their own goods. Like first they'll put people under they'll injure all these people, they'll kill all these people, they put all these people through all this like economic strain, through these daily hardships, and then they will open the crossing every time they're in the mood to, and they'll shove basically their own products in, and they'll make Gazans buy. It's really like dystopian. They will sell them these things, and it also ends up just being profitable for them in the end. So I think in a certain sense they are more than happy to have this population to exploit, as long as they can continue dehumanize, as long as they can continue this idea that people aren't even asking when the hell the occupation is supposed to end. Like the occupation, like the concept of an occupation is supposed to have like an expiry date, but they're not even doing anything to make that happen, because the status quo is good for them. The status quo it works. Like this is what their economy is. Their economy is mostly fucking like arms, and then selling their goods like in big part to Palestinians, and so they don't need the occupation to end. It's like everything. So that's also undermines like when you talk about like a peace process or proposals or anything. I'm like it's more, the ball is in their court in this way. It's like they have everything is working in their favor. Like they have no incentive to really change that, to really change the way they're acting.
There's a long dishonor roll of, like I said, crooks and weirdos in this administration. But I mean, I'd like to like maybe now refocus on, I don't know, like how you see, or like the people you talk to, like what are the current contours of Palestinian resistance, both in the West Bank and Gaza Strip, to their ongoing dispossession? I mean, you got people getting kicked out of their houses, you got the ongoing construction of settlements, and then just like the bombings and, like the airstrikes and killings that are going on. I mean, like, how is the Palestinian Authority, like what is their, like, how do they figure into all of this? What are they doing on behalf of the people that they're supposed to represent? And then broadly, like the Palestinian people, like how, I mean, this isn't nothing new, I suppose, but like how is resistance continuing in the occupied territories in Gaza?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the one thing to kind of start this off with is to note just kind of what the power disparity is, right? You've got Israel probably has one of the strongest militaries in the world in terms of the equipment and the weaponry available to it, backed by the world's only superpower, against a population that is, for all intents and purposes, defenseless. Now, the last time we spoke in May 2021, I think, Felix, we talked about kind of the growing military capabilities of Palestinian resistance, especially in Gaza. And I think one thing I had said was that after kind of their display during that assault, it's likely that we're going to see kind of a growth of military resistance in other parts of Palestine. And we have, especially in kind of the northern West Bank cities of Nablus and Jenin, where over the last year, small groups that have kind of grown and grown and grown, small groups of young men who've kind of self-organized into first committees that, armed committees that would defend themselves anytime the Israelis would raid the Jenin refugee camp or the old city of Nablus, but are now growing in stature and growing in their abilities. They've attacked Israeli settlements, attacked Israeli checkpoints, military checkpoints, and what we've seen is that because in the West Bank they're the only kind of method of resistance that we're seeing to ongoing Israeli colonization and Israeli military, their popularity has absolutely surged. And it's presented a huge threat to the Palestinian Authority run by Mahmoud Abbas. And the Palestinian Authority, we'll do a little history dive here, was set up after the Oslo Accords in 1994. The idea was that it would be a temporary 5-year accord that would eventually lead to a Palestinian state, and the Palestinian Authority would become the kind of government in waiting. What's ended up happening is we're now almost 30 years on from that. There's no Palestinian state, and what the Palestinian Authority has become is wholly dependent on Israel to exist. And might sound a little ironic to a lot of people, but the Israelis basically have cultivated a class of Palestinian elites led by Mahmoud Abbas that, whose financial business interests are tied to Israel, right? Because Israel utterly controls every aspect of life in Gaza and the West Bank. These people know that, if they're well behaved and they're docile, then they will be rewarded, right? And I think, Matt, you're a student of history. You probably could tell me what we call that class of people.
Mahmoud Abbas is like, I will not do him the service of calling him a fascinating figure. He's the
comprador of that.
Right. He's a comprador like you've seen a billion other times in history.
But he's so boring.
He's horrifically boring, but the way in which he governs and the way in which he speaks and his public persona is that of like a 30-term Chicago alderman put on the international stage. That is what I've always found so fascinating about him. Just his sheer lack of capability or charm or anything.
Absolutely.
But speaking more towards the original point you're making about like increased Palestinian military action and resistance. You mentioned Nablus. I don't know if this was fully confirmed. I saw it in a few places, but didn't resistance forces push the IDF out of Nablus at least for like a night? That was a pretty big deal.
What's happened with kind of this group in Nablus? They call themselves the Lion's Den, and they're interesting because it literally is just a bunch of guys in their early 20s and 30s who've managed to get guns, whether it's through weapon smugglers or on the black market. A lot of them getting guns from actually Israeli army issue rifles. So you can see there's a lot of corruption in the Israeli army there as well. And what they've done is, as they've grown, as they've shown kind of the ability to stand up and fight back during these raids, is they've become more and more sophisticated over time. They call themselves the Lion's Den. They're not really affiliated with any of kind of the more well-known Palestinian parties. And the Israeli army has raided Nablus continuously over the last year, arresting and assassinating some of these guys, some of their leaders. But they've also developed the ability to repel some of these invasions, especially in the old city, because the geography helps. It's an ancient old city, alleyways, very difficult for militarized vehicles to enter. But yeah, so they're growing, their capabilities are growing. The same's true in Jenin. But on the kind of the Palestinian Authority's role in this, because I think it's very important, the reason I keep talking about the popularity of these groups is, and the threat they pose to like Mahmoud Abbas is, over the last few months, there's been an insane kind of arrest campaign against anyone who might be affiliated with these guys, or even, prisoners Palestinians who were formerly incarcerated in Israel on account of any kind of resistance activity or anti-Israel activity. The Palestinian Authority has been, rounding them up. There is a site in Jericho that a lot of these guys are sent to, and it's very notorious. It's basically a torture site where a lot of them are sent to kind of extract confessions or information that's then passed on to the Israeli intelligence services. So that's where the Palestinian Authority's role is lying. And you're seeing kind of Mahmoud Abbas and his authority's popularity depleting more and more as this goes on.
But anyway, so their guy in Los Angeles, this guy, David Gervitz, he wasn't making much money, but he was running all these spies. And he just felt like he was underpaid, but the ADL couldn't pay him more. And he just felt like such a big shot, doing all this dark work with this like former CIA guy who like interrogated people. So he's like, we got to get me a better job and I'll continue doing this. So they found out that the Simon Wiesenthal Center's top researcher, his rival across town in Los Angeles, that guy made like almost twice his salary, but he wasn't going anywhere. So they all conspired together. Gerard, Bullock, and Gervitz conspired they knew that the Simon Wiesenthal guy was going to go undercover on this like white nationalist skinhead retreat out in the forest, out in the mountains somewhere. So they were going to leak to using their own operatives within the skinhead, like half of every skinhead movement, half of them are spies for somebody. And they were going to basically whack them out
Jesus.
there. And and the way the FBI found out about all this was because Gervitz, in another stupid gig that he did, Abe Foxman, if you remember Abe Foxman, he was like the face of the ADL all those years. He wanted to write an article for the Washington Times, the Mooney-owned Washington Times, on the Nation of Islam. And so he tapped the ADL offices in Los Angeles and San Francisco, which had access to FBI files on everything, unbeknownst to most FBI people, at least, if not all of them. And he tapped them for more research on the Nation of Islam. So Gervitz is like, I'm going to show them what a good guy I am, and maybe they'll give me a raise. So he steals some FBI files on the Nation of Islam, and then that very classified information winds up in Abe Foxman's article published in the Washington Times. The FBI's like, holy shit, how did that get there? Like, there's no way anybody knew it. It was classified from our files. It was stolen. So that's why they started wiretapping him. And as they're listening in on these freaks, they realize that they're running like spy operations all around the country, and that Gervitz is trying to whack a rival Nazi hunter and take his job. And so they eventually they have to pull the plug on it because he's about to get whacked. So they're like, okay, we got to pull the plug on this thing. And
I'm just about like before he goes to the white nationalist campfire event, what do they do? Like they just like secretly load up his car with like lox and bagels. Be like, yeah, we got the merchandise here. They opened it up. Oh fuck.
I know it's so insane. And they also have like the rival researcher from the Simon Wiesenthal Center. They have his address and car license plate just in case like he escapes from whatever, because, a bunch of incompetent skinheads, he might get away, but at least they'll know where he lives too, because they have all this information. Gerard works in the SFPD and he has access through all the computer files to everybody's home addresses, driver's licenses, all that stuff. So they have to blow this open. And, I mean, amazingly, the SF, like the prosecutor's office and the FBI, they raid the ADL's offices, and, it's looking pretty scary because they really genuinely pissed off the FBI. Like, the FBI can run these operations themselves, but when freelancers get in and do this, and this is treason. I mean, you have Americans spying on behalf of a foreign government, spying on Americans. They were spying on all kinds of Democrats, a senator, congressman.
Into it, doing damage control, then, that's where a lot of that attention is going to be directed.
And so the thing is, I mean, when you start to think about this, it's like, is the fact that Les Wexner won't give a TV interview, is that, according to Michael Jensen, I guess that's a problem That's like an internal issue that I have to wrestle with, right? Like the fact that Les Wexner isn't being brought up on charges or anything's happening to him. That's like a personal problem that I have to deal with, and I have to sort out on my own. And it's something about my own personal biases. It's like, no, guy, like if you're wondering how radicalization happens, it's because everybody sees that this is going on. Everybody knows what's going on, and they know that nobody's telling them the truth. And so this is, this is the ultimate outcome, is when you run these kinds of operations and you run them badly. Because if they were running these well, nobody would know about this, right? Nobody would know. Nobody would know anything about this at all. But they have screwed this up, and so they're not as good as people necessarily think they are. So Michael Steinhardt, he's another member of the mega group. He served on the Democratic Leadership Council and board member for the Foundation of Defense of Democracies, otherwise known as FDD. Now, FDD is important because it was created by the mega group itself. And the purpose of it at the time was to further the war on terror agenda and Middle East policy. So now, knowing what you know about Wexner's analysis and talking points on how to talk about the victory in the Iraq War and then the FDD and everything else, the AP reported that the FDD was paid $2.5 million by the UAE via disgraced Elliot Broidy and disgraced pedophile George Nader to host a conference amidst Qatar's diplomatic crisis about the country's role as a state sponsor of terrorism. Of course, it's like, what are they doing to Qatar? They're doing a shakedown. Oh, you're a state sponsor of terror. Now we're going to shake you down. And then what's happened with the UAE since, too. Now, Steinhardt is a chairman of the board of the Steinhardt Foundation for Jewish Life and Taglit Birthright Israel. So he's part of that whole thing, too. It's kind of funny. These guys all sort of have like specializations within the mega group that they do. Some of them do stuff with the Iraq War. As we're going to find out here, some of them, their focus is exclusively the Holocaust. Some of them, like Jeffrey Epstein, exclusively about blackmail operations. Wexner seems to be a jack of all trades. He's got Iraq War, drugs. He's got sexual escapades. He's got shooting people in the head. And I mean, I want to know more about these these questionable tax shelters. Like, what's going on? I mean, the fact, I said this before, the highest form of patriotism for a Jew in America is not to pay any taxes at all. And that's part of the thing going on as well. Lawrence Tisch. Now, Tisch is interesting because he was a member of the OSS, which is the precursor to the CIA, and he was a buddy of Donald Barr, Bill Barr's dad. I wonder if he learned how to play the bagpipes. We don't really know. Lawrence Tisch joined his family's hotel business, and then they formed the Lowe's Corporation. So they go from, I mean, it's just amazing. Guy is in the OSS in World War II, and he joins his family's small hotel business, wave magic six-sided Jewish wand star, and Jewish starred wand, I should say. And in 10 years, they have the Lowe's Corporation. Not Lowe's, the department store, but Loews. And people have probably heard of it because of the chain of movie theaters. They also own Lorillard Tobacco, which is the producer of Kent and Newport cigarettes. So that's another strategy, is like, I guess, killing blacks with Newport cigarettes. 1980s Predator Ball. Lawrence Tisch worked with the convicted inside trader Michael Milken, who originated junk bonds. Tisch gained fame for his 1986 takeover of Columbia Broadcasting System, otherwise known as CBS. In 1995, Tisch had to sell off CBS to Westinghouse. Lowe's Corporation is a holding company and one of the largest diversified corporations in the United States. In 2011, they had $14 billion in revenue, but that number has probably grown exponentially. Guy, like, you go from small hotel business to just like booming, biggest holding company in the world in just a couple decades. How does that happen without Jewish nepotism? How does it happen without networking behind the scenes and a lot of illegal activity? I just don't know.
Just buying low, selling high, making great deals.
Now, here's another thing that they did. Now, I said this on the midweek show, and I don't know how articulately I said it, but what the message was intended to get across is, if you're a Republican and there are things about the Republican Party you don't like, and you're a Democrat and there are things about the Democratic Party you don't like, and there are things you wish you had, and you're a member of those respective parties, chances are the reason why you're not getting them is because of shit like this. So the Lowe's Corp took it upon itself to promote something called the Campaign to Fix the Debt, which was the latest incarnation of a decades-long effort to slash Social Security and Medicare under the guise of fixing the nation's debt problems. Remember, this was like Paul Ryan and Jack Kemp's like little pet project, and it was all we ever heard about with like the Tea Party and even Republican Party politics before. Like, we have to fix the debt. We're spending too much money, you know, printing money, printer go burr. And the first thing that's got to go are these social welfare programs for you know, people who have worked all their lives and just want to take home a check, right? Isn't it amazing? Like, most of the people that they would have been targeting with this too would have gone and perhaps given their limbs or family members to World War II. And what do a couple decades later is come up with schemes to like take away the entitlements that were affected for this generation. It's like, wow, like, can you get any more Jewish than that?
Yeah, you know, it's he just wants to help Americans learn the lesson that he had to learn about running a small business and being fiscally responsible and saving for hard times.
We need to bootstrap. I mean, remember all the scaremongering about we're going to bankrupt the Social Security Trust Fund and the powerful. And I would argue that, yes, it's still something that stands in the way and prevents white people from organizing collectively, white people from having their own countries. It's something that is a boot on the neck. But it is losing its allure. The people that were sold this lie firsthand, for whom the shock and awe was most palpable, are dying off. There's a reason why these prison guards, 95 years old. I mean, think of the people that would have been alive in the next 10 years. We're going to reach a point where no one on the planet alive will have been alive then. And so this memory starts to fade. And as Bergman points out, there are no big existential threats. And I was talking to somebody else recently, they're going to have to invent one. We talk about, 9/11 being used as justification for doing Iraq and doing Afghanistan and bringing down Saddam and all this stuff. They're going to have to do something big, something bold. And they need something authentic. They can't stand up something fake that people are going to buy into. They try to do that with Trump, actually. Trump, in a way, sort of represents this existential threat to Jews in America. But Trump is loved in Israel. His approval rating might be 36% in America right now, but rest assured, Donald Trump's approval rating in Israel, I'm sure, is sky high and will continue to be sky high. So that's not the type of existential threat that they're discussing here. And it is a problem for them. So they have to invent something. And as the memory of the Holocaust fades, even in the minds of these people, this notion that this was used, this is starting to fade too. And they're even saying, Jews themselves are saying, when the memories fade of the stories that were told by your father and grandfather, what does Israel even mean? It's like, it's sort of striking that, yes, Israel was founded on terrorism, and it was also founded on a lie. And it's like, what happens when that lie just doesn't really work anymore? And how do you keep these people? And it's kind of funny. It's kind of telling. It's actually a little bit of a white pill to hear that the biggest problem that Israel faces is internal, that this is usually what happens once they've achieved somewhat of this global hegemony, that they start to have problems. This whole fake nationalism that was stood up by Bibi and Trump and Arthur Finkelstein around the world, with all these fake nationalists that were supposed to usher in this sort of Jignat era. That was in 2017. That seemed like it was unstoppable, and because so many people were tricked, us included. But now it's looking at it in hindsight, it's like they're all either out of office or in danger. They haven't achieved anything. People are kind of tired of all the bullshit that they've been sold. And it's like, so what is the existential threat that Jews are going to face in order to carry the fight on? And it's actually an inherent weakness that they have to have some sort of existential threat in order for them to dominate in the way that they have. And that's what the Jewish ascendancy of the last 100 years or so has been all tied to this one event, but that's fading. So what now? Shlomo, what are you going to do? What's next? What's the big thing? And, you see some of the arm flailing that's been going on, but yeah, I mean, it's kind of telling, isn't it? I mean, what's your read on that, Apache?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think that, because of the chutzpah, they're not going to stop doing what they do. They're not going to stop killing Palestinians. They're maybe a little bit more subversive and underground in terms of their assassinations now, but they're also not going to stop doing that. So in the absence of a huge threat to their security and their future, these things look much worse in that context. They can't use that narrative anymore. And also in terms of a browning world, which they have helped contribute to, and a browning Europe and a browning America, there's already less, there's less feeling of guilt about the Holocaust. It doesn't really work on black people. Like there's that story of the class of black kids going to see Schindler's List and just like laughing their asses off the whole time, be like, damn, he just shot that nigga in the head. But and then they had brought Steven Spielberg to talk to the class. But no, and also with the the BLM and the black and brown oppression stuff that they have sort of stirred up in populations in the United States and to a lesser extent in Europe. They're like, these people are like, we have our own problems. So it sort of leads us to the biggest threat now is Iran, but it's also kind of ridiculous, right? Because they view Iran as a threat for merely working to try and create nuclear weapons in self-defense, because Israel has a huge stash of nuclear warheads in their country. They have not signed the non-proliferation agreement, and Iran views them as a massive threat. So they're saying that just by having centrifuges or doing any of this work, this is the biggest threat that they face. And it's really, I don't think it's convincing to most people who have a lot of their own problems, not to mention the fact that the Holocaust is going away, and they are probably going to need to do some big false flag to get the reaction that they want. I think even in America, though, in terms of like support for foreign wars, especially in the Middle East, is low. I mean, I don't even know. Maybe another 9/11 type event would create a public sentiment in favor of this, but I honestly don't even know if it would, because people are so sick of this now.
Well, even annexation is on hold. Yeah. I mean, it's July 23rd. If you're listening today, I mean, if this is out fast enough, it might still be July 22nd, but it's almost the end of July, and they thought annexation was going to happen on July 1st. That was supposed to be annexation day, but it's kind of on hold.
Some of which have even been admitted to, sort of under the table by people involved in Israeli intelligence. So we have June 26th in Iran. We have a massive explosion rocking the Kojir missile production complex. And this is a location that's vital to Iran's missile capabilities. 4 days later, there's another blast. This time it was at a medical clinic north of the capital, which killed 19 people. Going forward, July 2nd, this was a big one. There was an explosion and fire that occurred at the underground Natanz nuclear facility, which is like a key component of the country's uranium enrichment efforts. So they don't know exactly what transpired, but a Middle Eastern official who is believed to be Yossi Cohen, the head of Israeli intelligence, told the New York Times last week that it was Israel who had detonated a bomb there. And analysts differ on what the extent of the damage was, but the assessments say that it destroyed much of the underground part of the facility, which is where the new centrifuges are being balanced and being put into operation. And they predict that centrifuge production may be set back, delayed, up from anywhere from a few months to even years because of this explosion that was very we can just say this was Israel that did that. The mainstream media is not going to say that explicitly, but they are going to allude to it.
Of course it was.
Yep.
Who the fuck else was it?
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, was it the Tibetans that did this? The rogue Tibetans? I mean, it's just like, shut the fuck up. No, I mean, maybe it was Nazis who did it.
Yeah.
These are white supremacists.
Yeah, just like all the violence happening at these protests all over America is just white nationalists.
Yeah.
So, interestingly enough, the building that was bombed in Natanz was right next to the underground production facilities where in 2010 there was a highly sophisticated cyber attack orchestrated by the U.S. and Israel. We know about this. This was Stuxnet. It destroyed about 1,000 centrifuges, and it totally set Iran's nuclear program back for years. But again, with sort of the, things in some ways getting more complicated, but also more sloppy. The newest bombing seemed to be pretty rudimentary. It was like a very basic bomb that was put on this building. And then just to finish up here, there were two more mysterious things that happened in Iran last week, actually. So July 14th, there was a big fire that broke out at an aluminum plant in Lamerd. Again, this is another site that is important to Iran's military. They're using aluminum for all sorts of military things. And the next day, July 15th, there were multiple fires that broke out at a seaport in Bushehr, and they engulfed 7 ships in the process, at least. So, yeah, this is like 6 things here in the past month. Just chaos happening, a lot of it intentionally done in places that are critical to Iran's military and nuclear capabilities.
Yeah, well, in the book, Bergman revealed that there were 6 Iranian nuclear scientists who were killed by Iranian opposition groups working for Mossad, and then Mossad operatives killed another 4 Iranian nuclear scientists in Tehran between 2010 and 2012. So yeah, I mean, this is another thing that they do is they obviously through opposition groups who are working for Mossad. We see this in America. We're going to talk about it today. Very serious guys that these opposition groups are carrying out the bidding of Mossad. And so something else that I want to point out too, and this is in the book, but it's also in a Politico article from March of 2018. This is a conversation between Michael Hayden, CIA Michael Hayden, and Barack Obama, and they're talking about the Israelis and these assassinations of the Iranian nuclear scientists. And so here, I'm just going to read this quote. So, assassinating scientists, whatever they are working on, is an illegal act under American law, and the United States never knew, right, according to Hayden, and did not want to know about these actions. Of course, the United States knows about all of these fucking things before they're going to happen, and they're not going to stop them. They just want to make sure that, there's no collateral damage on their end. And the Israelis, they make sure that, they're getting lots of funding from the United States. They want to make sure that they don't cause any problems for the Americans either. But the idea that the United States doesn't know about these things and won't talk about it, it's like, come on, you know exactly what's going on. But according to Michael Hayden, the Israelis never told the Americans their plans, not even with a wink and a smile, said Michael Hayden. That said, after learning about it afterward, Hayden had no doubt which measure undertaken to stop the Iranian nuclear project was most effective. Quote, it was that somebody was killing their scientists. At the first session of his National Security Council in 2009 after becoming president, Obama asked CIA Director Michael Hayden how much fissile material Iran had stockpiled at Natanz. Hayden replied, Mr. President, I actually know the answer to that question, but I'm going to give it to you in just a minute. But I can give you another way of looking at this. It doesn't matter how much fissile material they have. There isn't an electron or a neutron at Natanz that's ever going to show up in a nuclear weapon. Not in Iran, anyway. What they're building at Natanz is knowledge. What they're building at Natanz is confidence. That they will take that knowledge and they will take that confidence and they will go elsewhere and enrich the uranium. That knowledge, Mr. President, is stored in the brains of the scientists. Hayden made it abundantly clear to me that this program had no American relationship whatsoever. It was illegal, and the CIA would never recommend or advocate such a thing. However, my broad intelligence judgment is that the death of those human beings had a great impact on their nuclear program. And that's from Hayden. Obviously, Hayden was fully in approval of this. And, it's only a matter of time before the CIA and these spooks in the government just come right out and endorse these acts. I mean, we had to do it. We had to stop them, but they had to sort of practice this a little bit more. But obviously, it's like there's no problem with any of these people. They just let this stuff happen. So the idea that if only the world could find out about it, it's like the world's in on it. Like, give me a fucking break.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, a lot of this stuff is hidden in plain sight. The media won't report on it, but all the top brass in the U.S. know what's going on. Most of them support it, or they're blackmailed into not doing anything about it, or just completely being in the grip of Israel's power. But yeah, this stuff will come out someday, and they're already very brazen about this. You have Sheldon Adelson, not a guy in the intelligence community, but he has said explicitly in interviews that we should nuke Iran. And, he's one of Trump's biggest donors. So,
yeah, I mean, even Obama, people that want to plan trust on Obama as being slightly the better option or something. Obama is the one who accelerated the cyber attacks on Iran, like you're talking about with the program against Iran's Natanz plant. This was a project that was developed under the H.W. Bush administration, not H.W. W. Bush, codenamed Olympic Games. And it was cyber attacks on Iran. And Obama is the one who accelerated them. So this is from the New York Times in 2012. At a tense meeting in the White House Situation Room within days of the worm's escape, quote unquote escape, like the worm, Stuxnet just escaped onto people's computers, right? Obama, Biden, and the director of CIA at the time, Leon Panetta, considered whether America's most ambitious attempt to slow the progress of Iran's nuclear efforts had been fatally compromised. Should we shut this thing down? Obama asked, according to members of the president's national security team who were in the room. Told it was unclear how much the Iranians knew about the code and offered evidence that it was still causing havoc, Mr. Obama decided that the cyber attack should proceed. In the following weeks, the Natanz plant was hit by a newer version of the computer worm, and then another one after that. The last of that series of attacks, weeks after Stuxnet was detected around the world, as you pointed out, temporarily took out 1,000 of the 5,000 centrifuges Iran had been spinning at the time to purify the uranium. And so, yeah, Obama is just like, we're just going to put the pedal to the floor on this fucking up Iran stuff. So,
yep.
Yeah, this woke Obama. Am I right?
Exactly, yeah. And I mean, the Israelis, because they expect so much and they expect just complete obeyance from whatever they request. When someone doesn't do everything they ask, they get, enraged. It's the old, like, well, what have you done for me today? But Obama, he is not based. He falls more into the optics Jew category, whereas, whereas the Trump administration would be more the Jignat types. And, but this is still the optics Jew position, right? Like, taking out their centrifuges with Stuxnet is a lot better optics than just blowing up their nuclear facilities. And that's sort of what Obama was on board with. And same with like the Iran deal. I mean, it gave back money that belonged to Iran. It returned billions of dollars to them. And the conservatives criticized, they're giving a terrorist state billions of dollars, dropping, remember this, pallets of cash or whatever. But this was, this is the optics Jew position. This is like, let's work with Iran. We'll slowly subvert them. We'll use covert and digital means to take out their weapons, and we'll subvert them with media and capital and make their young people gay and protest a bunch of bullshit. Whereas the Jignats, Trump, Netanyahu are like, let's blow stuff up. We don't care about optics. Let's annex the West Bank, even though they haven't done that yet.
Yeah, they haven't, and they may not. They may wait until, they may have to wait for some period of time. I mean, we'll have to see. And so, yeah, the way that this ties in, too, is this is part of this evolution going forward with Israeli spy tech. It's something that we've talked about quite a bit, but it's part of a new strategy. I mean, like we've said a couple times throughout this episode, it's not popular to do war. It's not popular to do assassinations, especially when assassinations and these gay ops to large numbers of people are so obviously being perpetrated by Israel. It actually contributes to anti-Semitism, according to them, because people start to connect the dots in ways that they have not before. And you have, Jews recognize that there's this quote unquote problem now with quote unquote anti-Semitism.
In Western coverage, how openly genocidal the language from Israel has been in recent years.
Just real quick, the New York Times excised the comment by the member of the Israeli government that said, "This is what we're going to do to Gaza. They're animals." The New York Times excised the defense minister. The New York Times excised his comment comparing Palestinians to animals.
Yeah, I mean, in what other context would someone who has F-16s, tanks, artillery under his control saying something like that? In what other context would that be excised? It's shocking.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned Hawley and the fact that he wants to take all the money we're giving to Ukraine and give it to Israel. I mean, has it gone unnoticed the juxtaposition between the rights of Ukrainians to resist military aggression through violence and Palestinians? I mean, has that gone unnoticed in the world or in the media?
I mean, at AJ Plus, we actually, one of the things we did early in the days of the Russia-Ukraine war was published kind of a side-by-side comparison of how U.S. media and U.S. politicians talked about Ukrainian resistance to Russian occupation versus how they talked about Palestinian resistance to Israeli occupation. And this was a year ago. We're not talking about even this current round of fighting. I think as a Palestinian, I think Ukrainians have a right to fight people who are trying to occupy their country. What's crazy to me is that the analogy, rather than being Ukrainians and Palestinians on one side of the analogy, it's been flipped around. You have CNN reporters tweeting about how the Palestinians are the Russians to the Israeli Ukrainians. It's absolutely wild. There's just a complete kind of irrationality in how this is being cast. But even in things like, last week you guys were talking about the SS Waffen guy who got a standing ovation in the Canadian Parliament, right?
No, it was okay for him to volunteer for the Waffen SS to resist the military invasion of his country. That's okay.
Yeah. So, he was allowed to be a Nazi, but then the Canadian government will come out a week later and condemn Palestinians fighting occupation of their land.
Mohammed, I guess the other thing I noticed just in what little I've tried to avoid of the Western media in this, I did notice a number of interviews that took place on cable news with members of Palestinian civil society. And I guess it was surprising to me that they got past the bookers at all. But in all of these interviews, the host essentially can't even really push back against what they're saying. But what they will say is, even if everything you say is true, hasn't what's happened now, don't you condemn Hamas, but hasn't what's happened now, isn't that going to just only increase the violence and death toll for innocent Palestinians? Isn't this going to make life so much harder for people who are in the West Bank or Gaza Strip? I mean, what do you say to that?
Yeah, I think you see that in the media, and you see it among some regular folks as well. And I think for them, that might come from a place of genuine horror and fear for what might happen to the Palestinians. But I think for a lot of people who ask that question or make that demand, it's pretty insidious. Won't this make things worse for the Palestinian people? I don't think anyone who asks that question could survive a day in Gaza. I don't think they comprehend the horror of living life in a human warehouse. Borders closed, surveilled day and night from the sky. A lot of people don't know this, but Gaza's skies for more than 20 years have been, the sound of Gaza's sky is this loud buzzing, which has been the sound of Israeli drones that have been surveilling the Gaza skies and firing missiles down from the sky for more than 20 years. What does that do to your psyche when death is imminent at any moment? People don't understand just what this siege means. You fall sick, but the hospital doesn't have enough medicine because the supply of medicine is limited. The supply of medicine allowed into Gaza is limited by Israel. Your child has cancer, There's no chemotherapy wards in Gaza. So you have to apply for a permit with the Israeli military and intelligence to get your kid to go abroad so they can receive treatment. And often that permit is delayed for months and months and years, and is never granted. And your child dies of something completely curable and preventable. There's been cases where, the permit has arrived the day after someone has died as well. Like, imagine the horror and the anger and the vengeance that drives people. Even people who are granted permits to escape are often blackmailed at the exit point. We talked about the Erez crossing, that fortress at the north of Gaza. Oftentimes, a lot of people would be blackmailed as they're going through by Israeli intelligence officers who are trying to get them to become informants and collaborators against their own people. And if you refuse, you're often turned back with your sick child or your sick parent. There's no drinking water in Gaza. 97% of Gaza's water is contaminated. There were a few wells that were bombed by the Israelis in 2014. The power plant was bombed in 2006 and hasn't been allowed to be fully repaired since then. Over the past several, massive Israeli assaults in 2006, 2008, 2012, 2014, 2021, tens of thousands of homes were destroyed. Tens of thousands. And building materials to rebuild them has been severely limited. The only way, actually, the only way some people got to rebuild was through this insane mechanism where the UN, you would apply to the UN, who would pass your personal details, your family details, the coordinates of where you wanted to live, to Israeli intelligence, who then would approve or deny how much material you get, and that gets imported into Gaza for you to build. There's no economy because Israel controls what gets imported and exported. You're cut off from the world. Early on in the siege, I think around 2012, the Guardian reported that the Israeli government actually had calculated how many calories it would allow into Gaza to keep people just above starvation levels, but not more. Right? This is the siege that we're talking about. People do not understand just how depraved the siege has been. It's been almost 2 decades of this.
I don't know. Not only that, but from I guess from a Western or even liberal or left perspective, I think we like to tell ourselves that kind of violence and oppression incurs a kind of, I don't know, moral status to the people who are the victims of it, instead of imagining what you would how that would what that would do to your brain to experience that level of fear and horror every
Absolutely.
day. You think it would make you a better person or a worse one?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, this is when people have been living through this for decades, and I think a lot of the people moralizing or armchair strategizing from thousands of miles away couldn't stomach living in Gaza for a few days, let alone for decades. And genuinely, I think there are many people, even on the left, like you said, who mean well when they say this will only make things worse for Palestinians. And I think it's far more comforting for a lot of us. I have family in Gaza, even for myself. It's more comforting for me to feel like, okay, they're still alive, right? And that's better than being bombed. But I think that's because when there's no airstrikes, it's easier for us to look away. I was born in Gaza, I have family there, but even for me, it's easier not to have to think about the people there when they're not being bombed. So I think we all prefer it that way.
Yeah, the closest thing that we could compare Gaza to is a counterfactual. It is, I guess, if the Third Reich had been able to occupy the Eastern Front for 70 years. There's just nothing in modern memory that approaches this kind of treatment for this long. Americans already have such a difficulty envisioning the terror of precision airstrikes and sanctions and just basic materials that we take for granted not being there. But that turned up past a scale that we've ever seen, that people have no concept and no appreciation of it. And those of us who are watching in America, we're very lucky that our encounters with death and misery are questions of money or inconvenience or time or emotional pain, that we'll never have to know what we would do if our entire family had been wiped out, that everyone we know had been killed, and that hospitals didn't even have enough gauze, and that
boats coming in from Turkey to try to give you even basic supplies were shot down by the military, and no one cared.
Yeah, I mean, just this morning, an aid convoy, aid trucks that were trying to enter from Egypt, from the only crossing that Gaza has with that's not with Israel, it's with Egypt. The Israelis bombed the border crossing and told the Egyptian government that if the trucks get closer, they're going to bomb them as well. One thing that stood out to me watching some of the footage the Hamas fighters filmed of themselves is that, and I think a lot of people don't comprehend this, as much as Israel controls every aspect of life in Gaza, most people in Gaza have never seen an Israeli, right? And it's something crazy to think about when we think about kind of the dystopian, future where we talk about people being warehoused or ghettoized.
That you could have been born. That you could have been born, like after the 2014 war, like lived under the fear of that without having never actually seen the people doing it to you. That is a sci-fi dystopia.
Breathtaking.
Yeah. Not even the 2014 war. Gaza has been under a policy of closure since 1991.
Yeah.
Right. The Israeli army or the Israeli government decided that anyone who wants to enter or leave Gaza would needed a special permit. Right. I used to visit Gaza as a child. I used to spend summers there. I remember my mother would spend the entire summer going from office to office trying to get one permit to get us in and then one permit to get us out. Right. For most people, that permit was almost impossible to receive. And this was a decade and a half before the siege happened, before it was tightened, and everything was the suffering was increased exponentially. So we're talking about an entire generation of people who only know Israel through airstrikes, through the limitations on their physical freedom at the borders, sniper fire, and the fact that whether they get sick, whether they can't get a job, whether they can't go abroad to get an education, all of that is determined by some faceless bureaucrat behind a high-tech fence. And so these fighters who entered the Israeli military bases and killed Israeli soldiers and then moved on to Israeli towns and then were interacting with Israelis in their homes, this genuinely was the first time they'd seen an Israeli. It's absolutely mind-blowing to think about.
Has access through all the computer files to everybody's home addresses, driver's licenses, all that stuff. So they have to blow this open, and amazingly, the SF, like the prosecutor's office and the FBI, they raid the ADL's offices, and it's looking pretty scary because they really genuinely pissed off the FBI. Like, the FBI can run these operations themselves, but when freelancers get in and do this, and this is treason. I mean, you have Americans spying on behalf of a foreign government, spying on Americans. They were spying on all kinds of Democrats. A senator, Congressman, Senator Alan Cranston, huge Israel supporter, but a liberal. Ron Dellums, who was pretty well known. He's from Berkeley, Oakland. At this time, though, he was the African American. So basically, the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, was spying on an African American congressman on behalf of the apartheid regime.
That's the way you do it. You play the guitar on the MTV. TV. That ain't working. That's the way you do it, do it, do it, do it, do it, do it.